Hello, my name is Sheila Howe, and today I'm going to be discussing spiritual direction in extraordinary times for ordinary seekers. We will be exploring the what, who, how, when, why, and where of spiritual direction today. I know that Kathy Olds has done a fabulous job of taking us through history from ancient times up to Vatican II, and I'm going to be discussing spiritual direction today. Primarily spiritual direction during extraordinary times like 2020 and the beginning of 2021, and how spiritual direction can assist in the navigation and companionship and support of being able to live during extraordinary times, and not only live, but thrive and transform and transcend and make meaning and purpose out of brokenness. So let me just tell you a bit about me. My name is Sheila Howe. As said, I'm a marriage and family therapist licensed in the state of Arizona. I've been working for 38 years as a mental health professional, and currently I'm working as an online therapist primarily. I live in Oregon, on the Oregon coast. I'm also a trained spiritual director in 1998. I did receive my certificate from Keynote Institute. It was a very long time ago, and I've been doing spiritual direction ever since. I also was a founding member for the Arizona Ecumenical Institute for Spiritual Direction that was housed at the Franciscan Renewal Center. And today I'm connected with the spiritual direction program at the Franciscan Renewal as a referral. I primarily focus on couples, spiritual direction with couples, but I also will do work with individuals, and I just put together a program, a proposal for spiritual direction with clergy abuse survivors. I have a very strong background in trauma, and I have worked for years with clergy abuse and spiritual abuse survivors. So anyways, let's just talk about what spiritual direction is. I'm going to give you some definitions of what it is, and then we're going to talk about what it's not. And I'm going to give you an example of how spiritual direction works different from counseling, from pastoral care, from coaching, from mentoring, and give you hopefully a vision of what it looks like. And if you're interested, if you're a seeker, looking for something more fulfilling, more connecting, more relating, more spiritual, more mystical, more transformative, more contemplative, spiritual direction may truly be something that might fit in your life right now. That's all. So hopefully you'll walk away from this talk today kind of having a sense of what spiritual direction is and what it isn't and how to go about seeking it. And if you do go about seeking it, how to go about finding the best fit for you. So that's my job, is to help you today. So let me just read you. I have 3 definitions of spiritual direction. So spiritual direction is defined as a time-honored term for conversation, ordinarily between 2 people, in which one is educated and experienced in how God may be touching one's life directly or indirectly. So it's a conversation, it's a relationship. It's a relationship where one person has experienced a pretty extensive formation process. The formation process is usually a 2-year program academically, where there's a specific curriculum followed, and the curriculum looks at contemplative traditions, spirituality, prayer styles, scripture, some theology, the program I was in was ecumenical, but there's also interfaith spiritual direction programs. There's faith-specific spiritual direction programs. And following, well, actually, while the individual is getting the formation and then following, there's peer supervision and that is highly recommended, and retreats. And so the formation process is a combination of experiential and didactic learning. And it, like I said, it's pretty extensive. Spiritual direction is the process which includes God as a third partner. So that's very important. God is in that room. God is in that holding environment. God is in that relationship, primarily, centrally. God is a third partner in the process of growing spiritually with transcendence and transformation. So it's implied that in that holding environment, in that relationship with God, that there will be transformation and there will be transcendence of meaning and thought and feeling and heart and conversion. Spiritual direction is the continuous practice of helping another person or group or couple to awaken to the mystery of God in all of life and to respond to that discovery in a growing relationship of freedom and commitment. So spiritual direction is continuous. It's forever if you want to pursue it, because we're constantly being called to this place of refinement, where our hearts and God's hearts become unified. That's the ultimate, is that our capacity for loving is basically what God's capacity for loving is, that we become unified. But that's not really easy to do. But if that is the goal and the objective, it will be lifelong. And in this definition, it stresses that it affects all aspects of life. So one's career, one's significant relationship, one's family life, one's parenting, one's marriage, one's friendship, all aspects of life are in that conversation, are in that relationship, as in the context, are also in the context of God's presence with all of that. So, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as I go more into presenting what spiritual direction looks like. So, to summarize the definitions, it's a conversation, it's relational, it's continuous, it's a process with God and a trained other person who holds space and journeys and companions, and at times assist in directing, navigating, and assist in transformation and transcendence, and encourages a deeper sense of peace and freedom and a lifetime of committed change. So it's a very special relationship that allows for very special things to happen in the context of that relationship. It is not mentoring. It is not counseling. It is not therapy. It is not coaching, okay? And I want to differentiate that for you. Pastoral care and mentoring and coaching is about something. Usually a person will be seeking some kind of pastoral care. For instance, they go to their pastor, they go to their minister, they go to their church, they go to a mentoring couple with a specific request. I want to work on my marriage. I want to stop this addiction. I want to stop pornography. I want to grow in my relationship with God. So there's usually a specific request. And in that, the pastor, the minister, the mentoring couple will utilize prayer and scripture and will give advice. So it's more like advice. We'll present solutions. And it will be very grounded in a theology. Coaching helps people set goals and objectives and helps people kind of move their life forward. For example, I want to lose weight. I want to get into a career that's more conducive for me. So they come in with something really specific, and it pertains to their life specifically. Counseling is clinical. It looks at symptoms. It looks at diagnostic presentations, looks at problems, And its primary goal and focus and objective is symptom reduction, stabilization, and well-being, helping people feel better. So counseling is very specific to helping people have a greater sense of well-being, whether it's mental well-being, physical well-being. But that's what counseling is, very clinical. Now, that's not to say that spiritual direction is not pastoral, is not counseling, does not dispense advice. It does all of those things, but it's very different. It's different in the sense that the relationship is primary, and the sense of presence to God within that relationship is primary. And the sense of presence and discernment in assisting and helping and guiding and companioning the other. So what does that look like? The spiritual director is not necessarily going to dispense advice. It's not looking at the person clinically. It's not goal-oriented. It is not looking at objectives. It's not looking at it at steps. The spiritual director holds space. It creates space and time for the person who is longing, who is seeking a deeper connection with God, a deeper awareness and wisdom and discernment from within about God's movement in their life and what God is calling them to. Also, spiritual directors help in prayer, helping people pray, helping people in their concept of God. And primarily what spiritual directors do is listen. We call that holy listening. They listen with the mind and the heart. And they listen with the awareness of God in the person. And that is the focus. Discernment is really about discerning the movement of God in one's life. For example, if somebody's coming in saying, I'm going to give you an example, something I just talked to today. I'm really seeking a sense of meaning of who God is. I don't know who God is. I want to grow in my faith. I want to have a deeper sense of meaning, purpose in my life. And so as the spiritual director sits with that person in their longing, in their seeking, and they hold space, they discern the movement of God in that, and they ask the questions that will help navigate and guide and companion and broaden and expand that person's sense of awareness of God in their life. It's very interior. It's about working with the person's interior life, their heart, their mind, their ego mechanisms, their defense mechanisms, how they attach, how they love. And it's this process, this ongoing process of being called to a deeper relationship with God, but in that call, recognizing the stumbling blocks, recognizing how God is calling them and what God is calling them to. So if God is calling them to love, to a deeper place of compassion, to forgive, to have a deeper sense of peace, God is also going to call them to let go of what is keeping them from that. Let go of resentment. Let go of egocentricity. Let go of ego attachments. Let go of negative beliefs. All of those things. Because the same defense mechanisms that we utilize in life are the same defense mechanisms that emerge in our relationship with God. So in other words, if we're afraid of being judged, we may avoid, right? We may feel insecure in God's love for us, even in our brokenness. But through spiritual direction, one begins to differentiate their relationship with God from their relationship with their family, parents, family of origin, And God then takes on a greater meaning. God becomes more God and less father, less mother, less significant other. And in that relationship, that connection with a more loving, kind, tender, compassionate God, there's healing. And there's less fear. And there's growth in love. And there's more internal peace. And there's a greater sense of freedom to commit to peace and forgiveness and growth and compassion. So it's very interesting. So it's really, the core of it is that relationship and that sense of presence in that relationship. And the spiritual director holds it and guides it and companions and supports it. So if one is looking for that experience, that sense of meaning, that sense of understanding, that sense of presence, that sense of transcendence, that sense of transformation during these broken times, then spiritual direction is probably a good idea. So I'm going to kind of look at how pastoral care, counseling, and spiritual direction assist during these broken times. So for example, counseling. I've been very busy during COVID, which is surprising to me. But I had a lot of people reaching out, a lot of people feeling a tremendous amount of stress, being really challenged to not have a sense of control or predictability in their lives, a lot of grief, people struggling with isolation, disconnection, hurting, a lot of people hurting, a lot of people stressed, a lot of people anxious, a lot of people scared, and a lot of people angry. And so they reached out to counseling. And with that, my job was to help them with all that, to kind of begin to alleviate some of that suffering by helping them adapt to the new normal, adapt to isolation, adapt to powerlessness, and find maybe a kind of a more creative, maybe even a more spiritual way of living, maybe interact different with their families. What I found with a lot of married couples was that couples who are used to doing things together were challenged in learning how to be together because they couldn't go out, they couldn't go to dinner, they couldn't go hang with family, so they had to learn how to be with each other. So counseling was really helpful in assisting with that. Now, pastoral care would be somebody coming to the church to help them alleviate their suffering. So there might be interventions of scripture, like, this is salvation history, right? This is from day one. This is from Genesis, the story of brokenness and God's relationship to people in that, and God's covenant and that promise and that hope. And so I see pastoral care as being able to utilize scripture and prayer to provide hope, to also kind of connect that person to salvation history. And so spiritual direction during this time really has been, not only for my own personal experience, but for others, really about helping people align themselves with the brokenness of Jesus and what spiritual poverty really means for them. So it's really about growing in meaning and wisdom and challenge in terms of our faith. Poverty, spiritual poverty is what people have been experiencing in 2020 and 2021. But what did that mean? We didn't know what that meant until we experienced it. So the value of spiritual poverty, spiritual direction would assist in that. The value of brokenness and the hope in healing, the meaning of powerlessness, and the purpose of what that serves in terms of our relationship with God. And also the reliability, the reliance on God, the moving away from egocentricity, which is the reliance on things that our ego is attached to theocentricity. And that's been a big shift. And so the beauty of spiritual direction during this time has been the awareness of not being able to fix anything. Like, I can't fix COVID. I couldn't fix the fact that people couldn't go visit their grandkids. I couldn't fix the fact that that married couple couldn't go out and do what they usually do in order to have a good time. None of that could be fixed. We were powerless. But in that became this emerging awareness of God in the midst, in the presence of the everyday extraordinariness. And that became the connection that pulled them out of the self-pity, the hurt, the suffering, the unhappiness. And it was in the context of spiritual direction that those awarenesses emerged, were discerned, and can be discussed and processed. So spiritual direction, I feel, has been just so valuable and powerful during this extraordinary time because it gives people a new paradigm. It gives them a paradigm of what it's like to be Jesus, what it's like to experience rejection, what it's like to experience betrayal, what it's like to suffer, and how Jesus survived. Jesus survived through relationships. He was very relational. You know, he survived through his relationship with God. He survived by letting go of ego attachments. He told the disciples, go in, but don't bring anything. Let go of all those ego attachments, but keep your peace. And so spiritual direction kind of brings that alive, makes it real. And it's done in a discernment process, which means it's very personal for the person. So spiritual direction has the honor and the privilege of discerning for that person God's call and God's movement and God's journey for that person. So that's how I hope that helps in differentiating spiritual direction from counseling and pastoral care and coaching. And like I said, spiritual direction has elements of all of that, but it's different. It's very different. It's its own charism. So then the when. So when do people go to spiritual direction? So I'd like to just kind of like tell a little bit of my own story. So in 1996, I was a therapist working out of a church and doing great work. It was a really thriving, very viable church, and just thought I was just something else, you know, just doing great, doing God's work, doing great therapy. And then I had a client who filed a complaint against me with the board. And that sent my ego crashing, falling to the floor. It was a huge bottom for me as far as my career identity, my self-identity, because public opinion for me was always really important. And so I was crushed, and it was was riveting. It was one of those kind of gut punches in life that make you go, gosh, I don't know what all this means. I have lost a sense of meaning. I have lost a sense of direction. I have lost a sense of purpose. I'm not sure what I value. And so I saw at that time in the Catholic Sun, this is back in '96, when the Kino Institute was still this wonderful, well, was a wonderful, it probably still is, but was a wonderful place of lots and lots of spirituality classes. And I saw that they were starting a spiritual direction formation program. And I thought, oh, that's what I need. I need to integrate my work with spirituality. And maybe that will be good. And I felt really called to that. And I had no idea what spiritual direction was, really. I just saw it. And I thought, okay, this is going to be like spiritual counseling. And so I went and had an interview and met with Scott Hasselrud, a psychologist, and got into the program. And wow, it was probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life, what I learned. And what a different path, what a different journey it put me on. So for me, the win was coming out of suffering. It came out of brokenness. It came out of ego crushing blows. And then what happened was I learned about spirituality in contemplative tradition in a way I never have, and what that meant for me, and what that meant for my work, what that meant for my family, what that meant for my marriage was life-changing. And so also in terms of the movement, a lot of times for me, spiritual direction came from being very extroverted. My life was very full. It was busy. And God was calling me more and more to the center. I was too much out here. I was too much of the world. I was too much in the world. There was too much focus on action and not enough focus on contemplation. So the movement for God in my life was to go to the center. But I had to learn how to do that first. And that's what spiritual direction formation for me was. It taught me how to go to the center. And so to live from that center and have everything else then in my life come out of that center. And that's what spiritual direction helped me do. Now, some people I work with are very much in the center. They're very introverted. They're very contemplative. And they're challenged with, how do I be in the world? What's the action response? How do I give and receive compassion from others? How do I trust others? So how do I move out of this very kind of theocentric focus to sharing that, making it more vocational, more ministerial, so that contemplation and action is very much about the movement of the spirit, right? And so spiritual direction helps people find that balance. When to speak, when to act, when to be quiet, when to retreat. And we see that with Jesus, right? Like he's out in the world and he's doing great things, but then he gets disappointed, or he gets tired, or he gets overworked, and he retreats and he goes to the center of his being. Spiritual direction helps with that rhythm. And they help with that rhythm by teaching prayer as well. There's so many different prayer styles. I have a lot of people come to me saying, I don't know how to pray. I think I should be praying the rosary. I think I should be praying this way. I think I need to be more devotional. And so this wonderful quote from this Benedictine monk said, pray as you can and not as you should. So you pray as you can. So we start there. We help people pray as they can by introducing them to so many different ways of praying. So prayer becomes a great big piece of spiritual direction as well. Prayer, presence, contemplation, and action. And the action piece has to do with how do we take from our spiritual direction relationship and move that out into the world. And wow, that's powerful. Because if people go to spiritual direction in their brokenness and heal through that relationship with God, and then take that out into the world, what are they bringing into the world? They're bringing God consciousness. They're bringing God's wisdom. They're bringing divine consciousness. And then they know where to go back to the center. So it's this wonderful kind of ebbing and flowing of having that secret union, but then living it out in the world. And that's what spiritual direction really helps with a lot. Spiritual direction is very personal. It's very intimate. It's very integrative. Spiritual direction implies that as one connects a deeper, more transformative, more transcendent relationship with God, that they're going to heal. The brain is going to heal. The brain is going to integrate. The body is going to calm because we're breathing deeper. Our heart rate variability slows down. And we know all of that heals, right? So it's very integrative. It's very mind, body, and spirit. It's a journey, and it's a lifelong journey. So we never arrive really in spiritual direction, because so much of spiritual direction is doing shadow work. And our shadows are always there. And what I mean by that is those parts of us that interfere with our ability to do God's work. Those parts of us that interfere with our ability to love the way we're called to love. That's lifelong, and it's hard. But the really good news is you go back to your spiritual director with vulnerability and humanity and brokenness and share. Oh boy, this is what I did today. This is what I did this weekend. This is how I treated my child. This is how I treated my husband. And it's not going to be looked at judgmentally. It's not going to be looked at clinically. It's going to be looked at, okay, there's your shadow. There it is. There's your humanity. And how do we bring God into that? And bringing God into that, what will that do to help you with that part of you? So powerlessness, humility, surrender, very much part of this process as well. And having that become, excuse me, more integrated, like that becomes more natural. So like when something comes up that so disturbs us or hurts us, or we hurt another person, that it becomes naturally then to come from a place of humility. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And then a place of surrender. Please God help me with this because I can't. That becomes the response versus those old defense mechanisms of fleeing, fighting, or shutting down. Because we don't have to. Because we have this safe connection within the spiritual direction relationship, but also in that relationship with God that allows for us to heal, whatever that is, and allows for us to be able to rise above our egos, our shadow, our brokenness. And that's a wonderful promise. So that is the win. And like I said, it usually comes out of brokenness. People seek and long when they're missing something, right? Or when they're suffering from something, or when they're looking for meaning. And that's usually when people are seeking spiritual direction. Now, sometimes we'll see people seek spiritual direction when maybe they're feeling their faith is calling them to that. And a lot of times they come in and the focus is on doing it right. I want to do it right. I want to pray right. I want to do the sacraments right. I want to do it right. And so that sense of doing it right is then able to be transformed into discerning and listening for God's will. So it's no longer about doing it right. What is God calling me to? Where is God in my life now? And how does that compare with the life of Jesus, of what Scripture is calling us to, which is to love? So who do you begin to choose? So for me, I mean, first of all, you pray about it, that person will come into your life and you'll be able to become aware of that door that's opening, that door to that relationship. You want it to be the right fit. You want it to be the right person, somebody that you can feel safe with. That's huge, because it is such a vulnerable process, and it is such an intimate process, a non-judgment process. So that sense of safety. You want somebody with some good, deep wisdom, and you want somebody who's living the practice, who has their own spiritual director, who is connected with a peer supervision group, who has had really good formation. So those are questions you can begin to ask, like, where did you study? What was your formation process? Are you in a peer supervision group? Do you have a spiritual director? How has spiritual direction been for you? How has it been life-changing for you? So those are kind of questions. So that sense of fit. For me, I wanted to work with somebody who was really like a religious, because I was so much of the world and I had no kind of theological background, that I wanted somebody who was a theologian, but who was also very deeply spiritual. Not a rules person, but a person who integrated their theology with their everyday life and their spirituality. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was, again, the experience of my own personal spiritual direction, not only the formation, but my own spiritual direction was life-changing. It helped me stay married. It helped me become a better mom. It helped me grow in compassion for my clients. It helped me and it continues to help me. I mean, these are things that I'm still trying to achieve, but it helped me also let go of some of that perfectionistic, ego-driven identity that a lot of educated people kind of struggle with, and really prioritize the centrality of God in my life. So yes, the right person is like key. Right now I'm working with a Franciscan nun who's a spiritual director, and she's really amazing thing is when I started working with her last year, it was pre-COVID, right before COVID, and she introduced me to spiritual poverty according to the Franciscan tradition. And at the time I was like, what is that? I don't know what that means. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I don't know what that means. But then I lived it in 2020, in 2021. I was like, and because of that spiritual poverty, I was drawn even more closer to God. In nature, in reading saints, in scripture, and it came out of that spiritual poverty. So then I was like, okay, this wonderful spiritual director of mine today discerned that in me, and I needed that. She gave me that, she named it, she gave me that language. So finding the right fit is really, really key. There's different places you can go to in Phoenix. There's Spiritual Direction Rising, which has numerous spiritual directors. There's the Franciscan Renewal Center that has a list of spiritual directors and their biography. And Kathy Olds is there to also help you discern, so you can call her and talk about it and share with her what it is you're looking for and who it is you're looking for, and she can certainly help you with that. Let's see, where else? In Phoenix, there's St. Bridget's, who I'm talking to. Diane Saunders there heads up the spiritual direction program, and she certainly also can help pray and discern with you a good spiritual director. So, like I said before, there's group spiritual direction. Kathy Olds does that at St. Bridget's. I believe maybe there might be other people at St. Bridget's who do that. And that's where the group consciousness helps each other. So the held space is not just with the spiritual director, but it's with the group. And but primarily spiritual direction is done individually. And then there's this actually it's international, it's called Spiritual Direction International. And their website is www.sdicompanions.org. And they have an international database. A lot of spiritual directions happening online now because of COVID. I do spiritual direction online. And, and the Spiritual Direction International would have those resources for you. So there's a big net. There's a very wide net. Also, let me emphasize that spiritual direction is not just Catholic. It's not just Christian. It is interfaith. There is an interfaith program in Phoenix, the Wisdom Way, and they study all different faiths, plus Hezekiah down in Tucson, and they are interfaith as well. So, and then the Franciscan Renewal Program, it's part of the Catholic Church, but it's also ecumenical. Like you have Lutheran and Episcopalian and people of different Christian faith denominations. So, and what was really exciting when we had the spiritual direction program was that we saw a lot of evangelical people seeking this contemplative tradition that wasn't necessarily part of their tradition. It was very pastoral, it was very scriptural, but they wanted that deeper, more intimate relational experience, and they found that in the spiritual direction program. So there's a great big evangelical following now, the spiritual director. So it's across the board with faith and faith tradition. And what's really exciting is in every single faith tradition, Sufism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Catholicism. I mean, it's actually part of the human experience, spiritual direction, the seeking out, the longing for a relationship that one can connect to that will help them grow in spiritual awareness and wisdom and meaning and purpose. So with that, I say thank you so much for spending time listening about spiritual direction.